They called me just a caretaker. After 20 years, my single call sank their entire company. The air in the opulent penthouse office was thick with the scent of new money and triumphant ambition, a pungent aroma of freshly signed deals and ruthless ascensions. Sunlight, usually a gentle caress in the upper echelons of the city, felt like a harsh spotlight on Alistair Vance, the newly minted CEO of Kronos Corp. He stood before a panoramic window overlooking a sprawling metropolis, his back to Silas, a man who, for 2 decades, had been the silent, invisible skeleton holding the company's very flesh and blood together. Vance's voice, smooth and resonant, filled the expansive space, laced with an almost casual cruelty that seemed to hum in the polished air. "Silas," Vance began, turning slowly, a condescending smile playing on his lips, a carefully practiced expression of benevolent dismissal. "We've decided to go in a different direction. A leaner, more agile direction. You're a relic, I'm afraid. A caretaker. We don't need caretakers anymore. We need disruptors." The words hung in the air, heavy with a dismissive finality. Silas stood perfectly still, his hands clasped loosely in front of him, betraying no outward emotion. His posture was one of quiet composure, a stillness born not of shock, but of an almost preternatural calm. His eyes, though, held a quiet intensity, observing Vance with the dispassionate gaze of a seasoned surgeon examining a new patient, dissecting every nuance of the younger man's hubris. The word caretaker resonated within him, a deliberate and profound insult, echoing the countless hours Silas had spent nurturing, optimizing, and securing the intricate digital nervous system of Kronos Corp. He was not merely a caretaker, he was the architect of its very existence in the digital realm, the quiet sentinel guarding its most vulnerable secrets, the weaver of its complex, often invisible, tapestry of data. The irony was not lost on him, merely noted with a faint, internal sigh. Vance, misinterpreting Silas's stillness as resignation, as the expected capitulation of an old guard member, continued, his voice rising in an almost theatrical crescendo, feeding off his own perceived power. "This company is about to soar, Silas. We're shedding the dead weight, the complexities, the unnecessary redundancies. You're simply a part of that streamlining process. Consider yourself liberated." He gestured dismissively towards the door, a flick of his wrist, as if waving away a minor inconvenience, a persistent fly. "Your severance package is generous. Adequate, I believe, for someone whose contributions were, largely administrative." The casual dismissal of 2 decades of foundational work, of countless sleepless nights spent safeguarding the company's digital heart, felt like a physical blow, yet Silas's composure remained unbroken. Silas remained unmoving, a statue of quiet defiance carved from years of unacknowledged toil. The insult was profound, cutting deeper than mere words. It was an erasure of his legacy, a dismissal of his foresight, a repudiation of the very foundation upon which Vance now stood, oblivious in his ignorance. But where Vance expected a flicker of anger, a tremor of despair, he met only an impenetrable calm. Silas's gaze remained steady, almost thoughtful, as if he were not merely hearing the words, but processing a complex algorithm of human behavior. There was no argument, no plea, no visible pain. The silence stretched, unnerving Vance more than any outburst could have. "I understand," Silas finally said, his voice level, softer than Vance's booming pronouncements, yet imbued with an understated authority that subtly unsettled the younger man, pricking his bubble of triumph. It was the voice of someone who knew something Vance did not, something profound and absolute, a quiet promise of an unwritten consequence. Vance's triumphant smirk faltered for a fraction of a second, a minuscule crack in his carefully constructed facade. He had expected a reaction, a confirmation of his dominance, a sense of defeated gratitude. This quiet acceptance was unnerving, an unexpected variable in his meticulously planned dismissal. "Good," he recovered, pushing away the fleeting unease with a forced smile. "Then we're in agreement. Your access will be revoked by end of day. Please ensure a smooth handover. There will be no handover, Mr. Vance, Silas replied, his voice still measured, still calm, but with a subtle shift in inflection, a barely perceptible steel edge that made Vance's blood run cold, despite the warm office and the bright sunlight. The air itself seemed to grow heavy, charged with an unspoken understanding. Vance's brow furrowed, his arrogance momentarily replaced by genuine confusion, a flicker of something akin to fear in his eyes. "What do you mean?" he demanded, the certainty in his voice wavering. Silas offered a faint, almost imperceptible smile, a smile that held the weight of 20 years of unacknowledged labor, of hidden truths, and of a meticulously crafted plan now poised to unfold. It was not a smile of malice, but of inevitability. "Only that some foundations, Mr. Vance, are not meant to be simplified. And some secrets, are best left undisturbed." He turned slowly, his calm demeanor unwavering, and walked towards the door, his footsteps soft on the plush carpet, leaving Vance standing alone, a sudden, inexplicable chill seeping into the warmth of his victory. The golden light of the afternoon seemed to dim, and the city outside the panoramic window felt suddenly distant, cold. Vance knew nothing of the vast, intricate web Silas had woven, or the single, critical thread Silas held in his hand, ready to unravel it all. The stage was set, not for Vance's triumph, but for an unraveling he couldn't yet comprehend. To understand the quiet storm brewing in Silas's eyes, the profound certainty that permeated his every action, one had to journey back, not just months, but decades. 20 years ago, Kronos Corp was a fledgling tech startup, brimming with raw ambition and groundbreaking ideas, but critically lacking the foundational architecture to truly scale. Its early days were marked by brilliant concepts, but also by a chaotic, patchwork approach to its digital backbone. Silas joined not as a visionary, the type who graced magazine covers, but as a meticulous engineer, a man who saw beauty in robust systems, in secure protocols, in the silent, efficient hum of data flowing unimpeded. He saw the elegant logic in a perfectly constructed network, the quiet power in absolute security. He built Kronos Corp's technical infrastructure from the ground up, bit by bit, line by code. The server racks, towering structures of blinking lights and humming fans, were his domain. He designed its secure networks, implemented its impenetrable firewalls, crafted its complex encryption algorithms from first principles, and, most crucially, secured its burgeoning treasure trove of proprietary data. He was there when their first major client signed on, when the servers strained under unexpected load, when the first whispers of cyber threats emerged. He was the one who pulled all-nighters, fueled by lukewarm coffee and an unwavering commitment to stability, ensuring the systems never buckled. He was the invisible hand that guided the company through its infancy, making sure it had a skeleton strong enough to support the ambitious flesh. He wasn't the flashy type. He didn't crave the spotlight or the boardroom theatrics, finding the performative nature of corporate politics distasteful and distracting. His satisfaction came from the flawless execution of a complex migration, the successful thwarting of a sophisticated cyber attack before anyone even knew it happened, the reassuring green light on a system status dashboard, confirming perfect operational integrity. While others chased headlines and market valuations, Silas was the unseen artisan, meticulously weaving the digital fabric that allowed the company to exist, to transact, to prosper. He was the guardian of its digital soul, working tirelessly through nights and weekends, often foregoing holidays and personal milestones, convinced that his unwavering dedication was the bedrock of Kronos Corp's future. He knew every server rack, every network cable, every line of legacy code, every subtle vulnerability. He was, in essence, the company's living, breathing technical memory, its digital conscience. Over the years, Kronos Corp grew exponentially. What started as a small, ethically driven enterprise, founded on principles of innovation and user trust, morphed into a multi-billion-dollar conglomerate. With growth came new pressures, new opportunities, and, inevitably, new compromises. Silas, observing from his vantage point within the digital core, began to notice subtle shifts, like cracks appearing in a perfectly smooth surface. Early ethical lines, once rigid and clearly defined, blurred into ambiguous shades of gray. Data practices, once transparent and user-centric, became opaque, veiled in legalese. Regulatory compliance, once a non-negotiable imperative, evolved into a nuanced negotiation, often skirting the very edges of legality. It wasn't a sudden descent into darkness, rather, a slow, insidious creep, like a vine slowly strangling a tree. A decision to optimize data storage by consolidating servers, inadvertently creating a single point of failure that Silas had meticulously warned against, only to be overruled by cost-cutting directives from newly appointed financial officers. A request to collect anonymized user data for a new marketing initiative that, with a few lines of code and a simple database query, could easily be de-anonymized, turning personal information into a commodity. Then came the pattern of off-the-books transactions, disguised within legitimate data flows, managed through a labyrinthine series of shell companies and offshore accounts, a practice Silas had stumbled upon while auditing an old database schema, an anomaly he, in his quiet diligence, meticulously documented, initially out of pure professional curiosity. The more he dug, the more he found, and the deeper the unease settled within him. Silas, ever the realist, understood the allure of ambition, the seductive power of limitless growth. He wasn't naive to the cutthroat nature of the corporate world. But he was also fiercely ethical, anchored by a deep-seated professional integrity. He couldn't bring himself to actively participate in what he perceived as illicit activities, nor could he simply ignore them. So, he did what he did best: he observed, he analyzed, and he documented. Not out of malice, not out of a desire for revenge, but out of a deep-seated professional integrity and a pragmatic understanding of consequence. He created a shadow archive, a meticulously organized repository of every questionable directive, every suspicious data flow, every hidden loophole, every whispered instruction that hinted at illicit activity. He called it Project Crucible. It was his personal failsafe, a quiet safeguard, initially conceived as a measure of professional due diligence, a way to protect himself should any of these questionable practices ever unravel. He had hoped he would never need to use it, that the company would pull back from the precipice. Then came Alistair Vance. Vance was the antithesis of Silas. He was charismatic, media-savvy, a master of buzzwords and grand pronouncements, a man whose public persona outshone any genuine understanding of the complex systems he now presided over. He was hired to inject new vigor, to disrupt the market, to take Kronos Corp to the next level, buzzwords that, to Silas, rang hollow and dangerous. He saw legacy systems not as robust foundations, but as ponderous obstacles. He saw experienced personnel like Silas not as invaluable assets, but as impediments to radical, superficial change. From their first meeting, the friction was palpable, an unspoken clash of ideologies. Vance, with his superficial understanding of technology, dismissed Silas's warnings about the fragility of their interconnected systems, viewing them as fear-mongering, as the resistance of an outdated mindset. Silas, old boy, Vance had boomed during one particularly heated discussion about simplifying their network architecture, a plan that would expose critical vulnerabilities. You're too steeped in the past. This isn't the Cold War. We need agility, not fortresses. We need to be lean, mean, and aggressive. He had dismissed Silas's detailed diagrams with a wave of his hand, a patronizing chuckle. Silas had tried to explain the intricate dependencies, the delicate balance between security and accessibility, the years of accumulated technical debt that made radical simplification a recipe for disaster. He had presented detailed risk assessments, drawn up comprehensive diagrams, even brought in external consultants to corroborate his warnings. But Vance heard only resistance, not caution. He saw Silas as an obstacle to his vision, a symbol of the very old guard he intended to dismantle. Vance's reign was characterized by a relentless drive for superficial efficiency. He outsourced critical IT functions to unvetted, cheaper vendors, sacrificing expertise for cost savings. He mandated the migration of core systems to generic cloud platforms without proper security audits, exposing sensitive data to new, unknown risks. He slashed the cybersecurity budget, deeming it an unnecessary drain, a line item that didn't directly generate revenue. He championed a new, highly aggressive data monetization strategy that pushed ethical boundaries even further, ignoring Silas's quiet, persistent warnings about data privacy laws and potential regulatory backlash. He even, in one particularly egregious move, ordered the complete overhaul of Chronoscorp's proprietary data encryption protocols, replacing Silas's custom-built, multi-layered system with an off-the-shelf solution, claiming it was more modern and user-friendly, despite Silas's desperate pleas about the inherent vulnerabilities. This specific change, unseen by anyone but Silas and a few trusted engineers who had since been laid off, unwittingly exposed a previously unexploited backdoor within Chronoscorp's deepest data reserves, a backdoor that Silas had specifically designed years ago as a fail-safe for extreme emergencies, a kind of kill switch for the entire system, and then painstakingly kept hidden from all external eyes. Vance, in his ignorance, had inadvertently reactivated it, leaving it wide open, a gaping wound in the company's digital heart. This was the final straw. Silas realized that his quiet counsel, his decades of loyalty, his deep understanding of the company's very foundation, meant nothing to Vance. He was not just dismissed, he was actively undermined, his warnings scoffed at, his expertise ridiculed, his very existence at the company reduced to an administrative burden. It was then, seeing the catastrophic path Vance was charting, the inevitable destruction of everything he had built, that Silas shifted his purpose. Project Crucible transformed from a personal safeguard into a strategic weapon. He meticulously updated every file, every timestamp, every detail, ensuring its irrefutability, its perfect accuracy. He fortified it, anonymized it, and prepared it for dissemination. He added the final, critical piece, the precise coordinates of the reactivated, overlooked backdoor, the company's Achilles heel, now fully exposed by Vance's recklessness. Silas had not sought revenge in the petty, emotional way a small man might. His motivation was a profound sense of duty, a quiet fury at the desecration of everything he had built, and a cold, hard conviction that some actions, some levels of arrogance and incompetence, could not go unpunished. He watched as the digital edifice he had so painstakingly constructed began to crack under Vance's careless ministrations, like a grand building succumbing to deliberate neglect. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him, that it was only a matter of time before the entire structure crumbled. And when it did, he would be ready. His secret weapon wasn't a bomb, it was a truth, meticulously curated and flawlessly delivered. And Vance, in his bluster, had just handed Silas the very trigger. The days following Silas's dismissal were a peculiar ballet of quiet execution and escalating chaos. Alistair Vance, emboldened by Silas's seemingly docile departure, saw it as further validation of his decisive, ruthless leadership. He boasted in executive meetings about shedding the dead weight and streamlining archaic processes, never once pausing to consider the depth of the void Silas's absence would create. He perceived Silas's silence as weakness, his calm as capitulation, proof of his own superior intellect and vision. This profound misjudgment became the fuel for his accelerating hubris, propelling him towards an inevitable collision course. Silas, meanwhile, operated with the precision of a master craftsman putting the final touches on a complex mechanism. He did not storm out, nor did he linger to offer unsolicited advice or lament his fate. He cleaned out his office with a methodical efficiency, packing the few personal items he had accumulated over 2 decades, a worn ergonomic mouse, a faded coffee mug, a small framed picture of an early server room, a place of quiet pride. His actions were deliberate, unhurried, each movement a conscious step in a larger plan. He exchanged polite, brief farewells with the few colleagues who dared to approach him, their faces etched with a mixture of sympathy, fear, and a subtle, unarticulated concern for the company's future. He offered no dramatic pronouncements, no veiled threats, no theatrical displays of indignation. His final act on company premises was to return his badge, his eyes meeting the HR representatives for a fleeting moment, a silent message of knowing that went unspoken, but was deeply felt. But the real work had already begun, long before his dismissal. First, he quietly initiated the final phase of his information dispersal strategy. This wasn't a dramatic, headline-grabbing data dump designed to cause immediate panic. It was a slow drip, a carefully calibrated release of breadcrumbs designed to pique curiosity without raising immediate alarms, to guide the right players to the right information at the right time. He sent encrypted, anonymous tips to a select group of financial journalists known for their investigative prowess, their tenacity in pursuing complex corporate stories. These tips hinted at irregularities in Kronos Corp's quarterly reports, specifically focusing on the new, aggressive data monetization strategy Vance had championed, the one that skirted ethical and legal lines. These initial tips were vague enough to be dismissed by a casual observer but precise enough to trigger a professional journalist's instincts, creating a subtle, curiosity gap that would compel them to dig deeper. He included a few seemingly innocuous data points that, when cross-referenced with publicly available filings, would reveal slight discrepancies, just enough to open a preliminary inquiry and generate a subtle hum of journalistic interest. Concurrently, he began subtly pinging the public-facing systems of Kronos Corp from external, untraceable IPs, mimicking the patterns of sophisticated, yet ultimately benign, network scanners. These weren't malicious attacks designed to cause damage, rather, they were carefully designed probes, like a gentle tap on a fragile wall. He knew Vance's new, cheaper security protocols were already struggling under the weight of everyday traffic, that the outsourced teams lacked the deep understanding of the system's architecture. These gentle prods, like a single domino falling, would gradually expose the cracks, causing minor, yet persistent, anomalies within Kronos Corp's internal systems. He was essentially shining a soft, indirect light on the vulnerabilities that Vance had created, allowing them to become visible to the outside world, to the very administrators who were now struggling to keep the system afloat, without directly causing harm himself. This was the Zygarnik effect in action. The unfinished task of proper security would now nag at the system administrators, without them knowing why it was failing, creating a growing sense of unease and incompetence. Within Kronos Corp, the effects of Vance's leadership began to manifest with alarming speed, like a slow-motion catastrophe. Silas's warnings, once dismissed as the ramblings of an old, resistant employee, became stark realities. The outsourced IT teams, lacking the institutional knowledge Silas possessed and a deep understanding of the company's unique, decades-old technical debt, struggled to manage the complex, interconnected systems he had so carefully maintained. Minor glitches became major outages. Data transfers slowed to a crawl, customer complaints mounted in a rising tide, and internal workflows ground to a halt. The simplified, encryption protocols, far from being more secure, were creating widespread data corruption, affecting customer records, financial transactions, and even internal communications. Vance's off-the-shelf solution, designed for generic use, was buckling under Kronos Corp's highly specific, decades-old data architecture, like a generic patch attempting to fix a bespoke engine. The company was hemorrhaging efficiency, and Vance, ever the showman, tried to dismiss these as teething issues or necessary disruptions for innovation, publicly blaming the legacy systems and resistance to change from the old guard, further cementing his belief that Silas's departure was a net positive. Silas watched, dispassionately, as the carefully constructed edifice began to sway, then visibly creak. He received hushed calls from former colleagues, their voices laced with desperation, with a growing sense of foreboding. "Silas, it's a mess here. The new network security is a joke. We're losing data. Our firewalls are barely holding, one whispered, a tremor in his voice. We can't fix what we don't understand, and they won't let us revert. He listened, offered no solutions, merely a calm, I understand, allowing their desperation to build. He knew they would reach out to him, not out of malice, but because he was the only one who truly understood the system's delicate intricacies, the only one who had ever truly known its digital soul. He let their desperation build, allowing the curiosity gap of, what did Silas know that we didn't, to widen among his former peers. Vance, blinded by his own ambition, only intensified his efforts, doubling down on his disastrous policies. He ordered more aggressive marketing campaigns, promising unparalleled data security and cutting-edge performance, even as the company's internal systems teetered on the brink of collapse. He pushed for even faster data monetization, pressing his teams to extract more user data, more quickly, with even less regard for privacy protocols. He publicly announced a massive new acquisition, a bold, reckless move designed to distract from the internal turmoil and showcase Kronos Corp's unprecedented growth, to project an image of unstoppable momentum. Silas saw these moves not as desperate gambits, but as predictable, self-destructive patterns, the arrogant thrashings of a trapped animal. Vance was digging his own grave with frantic abandon, and Silas was merely ensuring the shovel was firmly in his hand. The initial, vague tips he had sent to journalists were now being followed up with more specific, yet still fragmented, pieces of information, carefully curated data points that, when combined with public records, would point towards a clear pattern of financial irregularities and potential regulatory non-compliance. He wasn't accusing, he was simply providing dots for the journalists to connect, knowing their insatiable desire for a compelling story, their relentless pursuit of truth, would drive them to find the connecting lines, to build the narrative themselves. He didn't need to hack into Kronos Corp. He already knew its deepest secrets, its most glaring vulnerabilities, and the precise locations of its hidden skeletons. Vance's arrogance, his ignorant dismantling of Silas's safeguards, had merely opened the doors wide. The company was bleeding from 1,000 small cuts, each one a direct consequence of Vance's streamlining, each one leading to the inevitable. The stage was nearly set for the grand reveal, not by Silas, but by the very forces Vance had inadvertently unleashed. The pieces were falling into place, not with a bang, but with the quiet, inexorable logic of a system pushed beyond its breaking point, designed to self-destruct when its core integrity was compromised. And Silas, ever the engineer, watched, waited, and tightened his grip on the final, decisive thread, ready for the culmination of his quiet work. The climax arrived not in a hushed boardroom, but amidst the cacophony of a high-profile industry summit, a glittering spectacle of corporate power and technological prowess. Alistair Vance, radiant in a bespoke suit that cost more than some people earned in a year, stood on stage, delivering his keynote address. He was charismatic, dynamic, effortlessly weaving a narrative of Kronos Corp's triumphant transformation under his leadership. He spoke of innovation, disruption, and an unprecedented era of growth, his voice echoing through the vast convention hall, brimming with industry leaders, eager investors, and a throng of media personnel, their cameras poised. This was his moment, his public coronation, the zenith of his audacious ascent. Silas wasn't in the audience. He was miles away, in a quiet, unassuming apartment on the city's periphery, his gaze fixed on a monitor displaying a live stream of Vance's speech. The apartment was sparsely furnished, a reflection of his focus on functionality over ostentation, yet the equipment around him hummed with quiet power. He had chosen this moment with surgical precision. The maximum number of influential eyes and ears would be focused on Kronos Corp, on Vance's every word. The impact would be undeniable, amplified by the immediate dissemination of news. Vance reached the crescendo of his speech, detailing the new aggressive data monetization strategy, painting it as a groundbreaking innovation. "We are unlocking the true value of data," he proclaimed, his arms sweeping wide, embracing the invisible audience, creating a symbiotic relationship with our users, providing unparalleled insights, all while maintaining the highest standards of security and privacy. He paused for the expected thunderous applause, a self-satisfied smile gracing his lips. Just as the applause began to swell, a collective murmur rippled through the audience. It started subtly, a few smartphones began to buzz simultaneously, then more. Journalists, their faces etched with a mixture of confusion and excitement, were frantically scrolling through their devices. The murmuring grew louder, transforming into an undeniable buzz, then a rising tide of agitated whispers, like a swarm of angry bees. The collective attention had shifted, decisively and irreversibly, from the stage to the screens in their hands. On the large, gleaming screens flanking Vance, where corporate logos and uplifting graphics usually resided, a series of news alerts began to flash. Not from Kronos Corp's official, managed channels, but from reputable, independent news outlets known for their integrity and speed. The headlines blared, stark and accusatory. Breaking news Kronos Corp user data breach allegations surface, internal documents point to systematic privacy violations. Urgent report SEC initiates preliminary inquiry into Kronos Corp financial discrepancies, whistleblower claims highlight off-balance sheet transactions. Developing story Kronos Corp's new encryption protocol under scrutiny, security experts warn of major vulnerabilities exposing millions. Vance, still beaming, paused, momentarily confused by the sudden distraction, the palpable shift in the hall's energy. He looked out at the sea of faces, his smile slowly fading as he saw the universal focus on their phones, not on him, not on his grand vision. A stage assistant, pale-faced and trembling, rushed to him, whispering urgently, frantically, into his ear. Vance's eyes widened, a flicker of genuine fear, raw and unmasked, replacing his manufactured confidence. The color drained from his face, leaving it an ashen gray. Silas, watching the live stream from his quiet apartment, saw it all unfold. He saw the shift in Vance's posture, the sudden rigidness, the panic blooming in his eyes, the subtle tremor in his hand as he clutched the podium. This was the precise moment. This wasn't just a data leak, it was a targeted, multi-pronged disclosure, triggered by Silas's final, deliberate action. Earlier that morning, after receiving confirmation that the initial journalistic breadcrumbs had led to preliminary inquiries and that Kronos Corp's internal systems were teetering on the edge of public failure due to Vance's reckless changes, Silas had made his move. It wasn't a single phone call, as the legend would have it later, a dramatic flourish. It was the activation of the final sequence of Project Crucible, a culmination of years of meticulous preparation. With a single, precise click of a mouse, the quiet sound barely audible in his calm apartment, he had activated the last phase of his plan. This wasn't a hack in the traditional sense, but an orchestrated release, a carefully engineered unburdening of truth. The single phone call was merely a metaphor for the single, decisive action that unleashed a cascade of pre-programmed events. Encrypted packets of data, containing the full, unredacted dossier from Project Crucible, began to stream from his distributed network. These weren't aimed at Kronos Corp's already compromised servers, which would only invite more chaos. Instead, they streamed directly at the secure, anonymous drop boxes of the financial regulatory authorities, the data protection agencies, the cybercrime units, and, yes, a carefully selected network of the most aggressive investigative journalists globally, each receiving their piece of the puzzle simultaneously. The information wasn't merely a list of allegations or a collection of circumstantial evidence. It was a meticulously compiled, irrefutable repository, a digital time capsule of Kronos Corp's descent. Detailed logs of the anonymized user data that could be, and was, re-identified for illicit marketing, complete with dates, times, and the executives who approved the process. The precise financial ledgers of the shell companies, complete with transaction IDs, wire transfers, and account details that linked back directly to Kronos Corp's executive board, specifically naming Vance and his closest allies in the financial manipulations. Asterisk technical specifications of the flawed new encryption protocol, highlighting the specific backdoor Vance had inadvertently opened with his modern solution, along with irrefutable proof of its exploitation and the resulting data corruption affecting millions of customer records. Asterisk internal memos and emails, showing explicit directives from Vance and his team to bypass regulatory checks, silence internal whistleblowers, and disregard expert warnings. Asterisk and finally, the comprehensive audit of the company's weakest point, the years-old, hidden vulnerability that Silas had always protected, a kind of master key to their core financial transaction systems. This vulnerability had now been ruthlessly exposed by Vance's careless restructuring and fully detailed for any competent authority to exploit, making it ripe for financial tracking and revealing their off-the-books dealings. The public news alerts were just the tip of the iceberg, the visible manifestation of a much deeper, more devastating blow. The real damage was being done quietly, systematically, within the secure digital vaults of government agencies, where legal teams and forensic experts were already poring over the irrefutable evidence. Back at the summit, Vance tried to regain control, his voice cracking, his hands visibly shaking. There must be some mistake. These are baseless accusations. An attack by our competitors. But his desperate words were drowned out by the rising crescendo of media queries, the incessant flashing of cameras, and the frantic whispers of investors pulling out their phones, accessing their trading apps, watching in horror. Share prices began to plummet, visible on their screens in real time, a digital cascade of financial ruin. A grim-faced man in a dark suit, flanked by two others equally unsmiling, walked purposefully towards the stage, cutting through the stunned crowd like a knife. They were not security, not event staff. They were federal agents. One of them, holding up a badge with quiet authority, approached Vance, speaking in a low, authoritative voice that nevertheless carried weight in the stunned silence that had fallen over the hall, a silence broken only by the frantic clicking of camera shutters. "Mr. Alastair Vance. We need you to come with us for questioning regarding multiple serious allegations of financial fraud, data privacy violations, and reckless endangerment of corporate assets." Vance's face, once vibrant with self-assurance, went ashen, drained of all color. He looked out at the sea of horrified faces, then back at the stage assistant who had whispered to him, who now looked away in shame, unable to meet his gaze. His eyes, for a fleeting moment, darted towards the cameras, as if searching for an escape, for a way to manage this narrative. There was none. His carefully constructed empire, built on arrogance and ignorance, was not merely cracking, it was collapsing in real time, under the immense weight of truths he had so carelessly dismissed, truths he had actively sought to bury. Silas, watching from his quiet apartment, saw the agents gently but firmly escort Vance off stage, the image freezing on Vance's utterly defeated face, his eyes wide with disbelief and dawning horror, just before the live feed cut out abruptly. He felt no elation, no vengeful satisfaction, no triumphant rush of adrenaline. Only a profound sense of quiet completion, a balancing of the scales. The silence he had maintained for 20 years had finally found its voice, a voice that roared with irrefutable evidence, tearing down the illusion of an empire. The unraveling of Kronos Corp was swift and brutal, a corporate implosion that captivated financial news channels and legal analysts for months, a textbook example of corporate malfeasance brought to light. The summit stage had been the symbolic ground zero, the public declaration of the company's downfall, but the real tremors began immediately after Vance's public escort. The information Silas had meticulously compiled and released was not just damning, it was meticulously cross-referenced, irrefutable, and precisely targeted. It contained enough specific details, IP addresses, internal server logs, financial transaction numbers, time-stamped communications, and even recorded conversations, to allow various regulatory bodies to launch coordinated, simultaneous investigations that left no stone unturned. Within hours of Vance's public humiliation, Kronos Corp stock plummeted, wiping out billions in market capitalization. Trading was halted indefinitely. The board of directors, caught completely off guard by the sheer volume and irrefutability of the evidence, issued a series of increasingly frantic and contradictory statements, oscillating wildly between vehement denial and desperate damage control. They launched an internal investigation, a futile, desperate attempt to contain the contagion, but found themselves drowning in the very mess Vance had created, a digital quagmire of their own making. The initial news alerts snowballed into a deluge of exposés. Investigative journalists, armed with Silas's anonymous tips and the initial leaks, dug deeper, uncovering layers of corporate malfeasance that went far beyond mere negligence, hinting at systemic corruption. They uncovered the systematic privacy violations, the deliberate obfuscation of financial records to inflate profits, and the shocking recklessness with which core infrastructure had been jeopardized for short-term gains. Former employees, emboldened by the public revelations and the promise of protection, began to come forward, corroborating Silas's assertions and adding their own anecdotes of Vance's dismissive attitude, his arrogant disregard for warnings, and the growing internal chaos that had festered under his leadership. The data breach, once a mere allegation, became a tangible, horrifying reality. Millions of customer records, including sensitive financial information, were confirmed to have been compromised due to the flawed encryption and the reactivated backdoor. The sheer scale of the breach was unprecedented. Class action lawsuits were filed almost immediately, representing countless individuals whose privacy had been violated and whose data was now frighteningly vulnerable. The company faced astronomical fines from data protection agencies around the globe, and its reputation, once sterling and cutting-edge, was now irrevocably tarnished, reduced to a byword for corporate greed and incompetence. Alistair Vance became the immediate scapegoat, his fall as precipitous as his rise. Though the investigations quickly revealed the complicity of several key executives he had brought in, individuals who had actively participated in or willfully ignored the illicit activities, Vance was seen as the architect of the disaster. He himself was charged with multiple counts of fraud and corporate malfeasance, including endangering critical infrastructure and consumer data. His carefully cultivated public image shattered, replaced by a mugshot that circulated widely, a stark contrast to his usual charismatic smirk. He faced a long, arduous legal battle, his personal assets frozen, his lavish empire reduced to rubble. The ambitious acquisition he had announced just hours before his arrest collapsed, further cementing Kronos Corp's financial ruin, a spectacular, self-inflicted wound. The shockwaves reverberated throughout the industry. Other companies, suddenly nervous about their own hidden vulnerabilities and ethical shortcuts, began re-evaluating their own data security protocols and regulatory compliance with newfound urgency. It was a stark, brutal lesson in the consequences of prioritizing superficial growth and short-term profits over foundational integrity, ethical conduct, and genuine expertise. Within Kronos Corp, the atmosphere was one of profound regret and disbelief. Many of Silas's former colleagues, who had silently witnessed Vance's destructive policies but were too afraid to speak out, now openly expressed their remorse, their guilt heavy on their shoulders. They remembered Silas's quiet warnings, his tireless efforts, his unwavering dedication to the systems they now struggled to comprehend. They realized, with horrifying clarity, that what Vance had dismissed as legacy issues and resistance to change were, in fact, the very pillars that had kept the company standing, the very fabric of its existence. The quiet man they had overlooked, the caretaker they had allowed to be cast aside, was the only one who had truly understood the system's delicate intricacies, the only one who had held the keys to its stability. Some of Silas's closest former colleagues, now facing unemployment and the bitter fallout of the company's collapse, reached out to him, cautiously, humbly, seeking solace or perhaps absolution. "You warned us, Silas," one former senior engineer admitted, his voice thick with emotion during a phone call, tears in his eyes. You tried to tell us. We didn't listen. We let him do this. We were cowards. Silas listened, offered no judgment, only a quiet understanding. He had not sought their praise or their regret. He had merely sought justice for the desecration of his life's work, for the principles he held dear. The Kronos Corp building, once a gleaming symbol of corporate might and technological innovation, now stood as a monument to hubris. Teams of forensic accountants and cybersecurity experts swarmed its offices, dissecting its broken systems, tracing the digital breadcrumbs Silas had so expertly laid, unraveling the intricate web of deceit. The company, once a titan, was now a hollow shell, its future uncertain, its legacy forever stained by the recklessness of a man who valued showmanship over substance, and who fundamentally misunderstood the quiet, profound power of the man he chose to dismiss. The once vibrant hum of servers, the beating heart of Kronos Corp, had fallen silent, a chilling testament to the silence of a man who once held its very essence in his hands. Months turned into a year, then two. The dust settled, albeit slowly, on the ruins of Kronos Corp. The company, its brand irrevocably damaged, its reputation in tatters, was eventually acquired for a mere fraction of its former value by a rival firm, which promptly began the arduous task of rebuilding its infrastructure from the ground up, with a newfound, desperate emphasis on ethical practices and robust security. Vance was found guilty on several counts, serving a significant prison sentence, his reputation and once vast fortune utterly annihilated. His name became a cautionary tale in business schools, a stark example of the perils of unchecked ambition, profound ignorance, and the catastrophic consequences of disregarding foundational expertise. Silas, however, had long since moved on. He didn't gloat, nor did he seek public recognition or media attention. The quiet satisfaction of seeing justice served, of seeing the balance restored, was enough. The experience had confirmed his long-held belief in the power of diligent observation and strategic foresight. He had spent years in the shadows, perfecting his craft, understanding the intricate dance between technology and human nature, the delicate balance between progress and peril. His integrity, once dismissed as stubbornness, as an inability to adapt, had proven to be his greatest strength, his unwavering compass. He found solace in a simpler, more meaningful life. With the generous, if belated, severance package from Kronos Corp, and a quiet consulting business that discreetly sought his expertise from companies truly valuing integrity and deep knowledge, companies that had learned from Kronos Corp's spectacular failure, he no longer pursued the relentless, often soul-crushing pace of corporate life. He moved to a quiet coastal town, where the rhythm of the waves crashing against the shore replaced the incessant hum of servers, a soothing, natural cadence. He spent his days indulging in long-neglected hobbies, woodworking, amateur astronomy, cultivating a small, vibrant garden, finding a different kind of beauty in the meticulous precision of crafting something tangible, something that couldn't be undone by a careless executive, something that grew organically. His mind, once consumed by complex algorithms and impenetrable firewalls, now found peace in the intricate patterns of nature, the vastness of the cosmos, the predictable flow of the tides. He still kept up with technological advancements, fascinated by the ever-evolving landscape, but his perspective had shifted. He saw the human element more clearly, the interplay of trust, competence, and consequence, understanding that technology was merely a tool, its impact determined by the hands that wielded it. Sometimes, a former colleague would reach out, cautiously, humbly, seeking his advice on a particularly vexing technical challenge, or simply wanting to share a quiet moment of reflection, a silent acknowledgement of his wisdom. Silas always responded with grace, offering wisdom without judgment, a calm presence in their turbulent lives. He had no desire to rebuild the past, only to contribute to a more responsible, more ethical future. His story became an unspoken legend in certain circles, a cautionary tale for arrogant leaders, an inspiring whisper for the undervalued, unseen forces within any organization. It was a testament to the idea that true power doesn't always reside in the loudest voice or the highest office. Sometimes, it resides in the quietest corners, in the hands of those who truly understand the foundations, who meticulously build, patiently observe, and who, when pushed too far, possess the wisdom and the foresight to dismantle what others have carelessly erected. The ultimate lesson of Silas's story is a profound one, that true value is often found not in the dazzling facade, the grand pronouncements, or the superficial efficiencies, but in the unseen foundations. It is in the quiet dedication, the meticulous expertise, and the unwavering integrity of those who truly understand the core workings of any system, be it a company, a community, or a relationship. Underestimate the caretakers at your peril, for they are often the true architects, the silent guardians who hold the keys to stability, the hidden strength upon which everything else rests. And when their warnings are dismissed, and their contributions scorned, their quiet power, when unleashed, can bring down the grandest, most arrogant of empires. The universe, in its infinite wisdom, always finds a way to balance the scales, often through the very individuals whose quiet strength was once so carelessly overlooked. If Silas's story resonated with you, and you appreciate tales of quiet justice and life lessons learned the hard way, then you're in the right place. Our channel is dedicated to uncovering more narratives like this, where overlooked individuals rise to define their own destiny and where arrogance meets its inevitable downfall. Don't miss out on our next deep dive into the fascinating world of human resilience and strategic thinking. Make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell so you're always updated when a new story drops. And now, we want to hear from you. Have you ever encountered a situation where someone's dedication was belittled, only for their true value to become glaringly apparent later? Or, if you were in Silas's shoes, what would you have done when faced with such blatant ingratitude and dangerous incompetence? Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. We read every one.